So without further ado, Sarah and Deepak, if I could ask you to unmute yourself and put your videos on, it would be much, much appreciated. Thank you. Hi. Give us a bit of a wave just so they know it's a real picture. Deepak, we can see you're in an office. I first thought that was a fake background, but you're definitely in an office. And Sarah, I assume that you're at home.
Absolutely, home office.
Fantastic. Now, I'm not going to do too much of an introduction or take up too much of your time because this is your show. We can all see what the title of this event is right there on the screen. So what I'm going to do, Sarah and Deepak, I'm going to hand this over to you and let yourselves do a quick introduction and then kick it off. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bertie, and good morning, afternoon or evening. I don't think we've ever spoken to such a global audience before, so this is fantastic to see. As Bertie mentioned, we're from MCM. Thank you so much for joining this conversation about the future of the workplace. So, as a way of introduction, I'm Deepak. I'm a designer at heart, but I'm really passionate about using design as a force of good. So over the last 12 months, I've been leading MCM's ambition to becoming a B Corp. This mirrors our deliberate shift in our purpose and really gives us the kind of framework to be the kind of business we want to be and have the kind of impact we want to have on the world.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Bolas, a change maker, a culture shaper, and passionate about supporting leaders to really step up and lead the way into this current unknown.
Sarah, are you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, all good.
It just froze for 1 second, but we're all good to go.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Deepak.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So look, the last 16 months have been like no other in living memory. And we've noticed with fascination how this landscape is demanding a different kind of leadership. And in our industry, a different kind of approach when considering the complexities of the future workplace. You know, the old driver of simply squeezing square meters is just not cutting anymore. So before we try to imagine the future world of work, let's take a trip down memory lane and let's do a time travel back to March 2020. So here in the UK, people initially responded to the news of the global pandemic and the first lockdown in some fairly unexpected ways. In the face of a virus that caused breathing difficulties, aches and pains, loss of taste and smell, people bought toilet roll. It was mad. There were people panic buying bulk amounts of toilet roll in the fear that suddenly they would run out. You know, apart from the media frenzy surrounding this is primarily down to how we are wired to respond to change, which is often not very logical.
So what was actually going on here? A seemingly illogical response to threat. And this really speaks to the first point we want to draw your attention to, that impacts on how we lead and in fact how most of us experience change in times of crisis. And that is that we're really wired for certainty. Literally, our brain craves predictability and a level of certainty because it's an efficient way to operate. If we create mental shortcuts, we can multitask. In the same way that you can walk a familiar route without wasting too much cognitive energy because it's allowing you to have a conversation with a friend or be on your phone or sorting out your diary. So when our predictability becomes severely disruptive, our craving for certainty can actually start to override all logic and reason. So we need to understand a little bit about what's going on in our brains here. Although we like to think of ourselves as largely rational and logical creatures, our psychology is sometimes against us. So our neocortex here at the front of our heads is responsible for this higher order brain function, and it's incapable of incredible things. It helps us to plan. It allows us to reason. We can apply logic. We can have abstract thought, and very importantly, it allows us to imagine into the future. Very important for the topics we're going to cover later. But we have another system operating in parallel. And this is sometimes known as System 1 for any of you that have read the book Fast or Slow Thinking or are interested in neuroscience. But this is the part of our brain that's responsible for the more automatic unconscious behaviours. So regulating heart rate, our temperature, our breathing, but it's also operating our limbic system where our emotions and memories live, but also our habits. And when we experience extreme uncertainty, where these mental shortcuts don't work anymore because the context has changed, it can come up as a threat response, and our flight or fight response can be really triggered. Now, if our nervous system starts experiencing the uncertainty as such a serious enough threat, this front piece, this logical piece, actually shuts down. Our brain switches gear and the system one takes over. And what happens is we start connecting dots that aren't there. We can get intensely suspicious or paranoid. We can end up not being able to read some of the more subtle cues of information around us, or we go and buy lots of toilet roll. And a lot of this also takes up a tremendous amount of our body's resource, because, you know, the oxygen and the glucose is required in this other part of our brain. A lot of us that went through lockdowns might remember how tiring those first few weeks are. And so not only, and because really this pandemic not only placed us in isolation, but it also put us in this completely unknown new reality where uncertainty was rife. We had so many broken behavioural patterns, from how we work, how we buy things, for those of all that had to cope with homeschooling, how we learn, how we ate and got our groceries, communicate with others. These all shifted into these different behavioural norms, and what we need to allow for is a shift back to something different yet again as we calibrate into this new future. And this is something that leaders are going to have to really factor in. So this leads us to the very first part of our sorry, I had somebody asking to annotate the slides, so my answer is no. Apologies, I'm going to keep clicking to decline. But so this takes us into our first leadership challenge, which is, how do you lead with certainty when there's actually so little of it?
Yeah, and look, it has been without a doubt a very uncertain period. Let's just take the subject of working patterns as an example. So I'm sure you'll recall some of the headlines about this. So way back in May 11, 2020, which was the beginning of the UK lockdown, you know, the sentiment very much was working from home is here to stay. This then was further confirmed with flexible working is going to be the new normal. Then it started to sway a little bit. It became a little bit more around, actually, remote working, maybe it's a trend, but the future's definitely not going to be hybrid. And absolutely, like, well, you know, remote working definitely can't last forever, until it got even more serious, where people were stating working from home poses serious dangers to our health and well-being. And more recently still, we've had a whole heap of press around, you know, half of UK office workers actually afraid of coming back to offices. You know, employees, in fact, large numbers of employees are going to quit if they're forced to return to the office. I'm sure many of you caught the news about Apple employees really pushing back against the 3-day mandate that was put to them. And even more recently, only last week, I read this article on BBC about the 5-day office week will become the norm within the next couple of years. So the reason we've shown you this is just to kind of notice how many times that pendulum has swung from one extreme to the other over the course of the last 16 months.
And this leads us nicely to leadership challenge number 2. Again, we're wired in a certain way that we crave belonging. At heart, we're still quite tribal. And one way that we calibrate whether or not we're doing okay, whether we're safe, is to look around us at our peers, our competitors, and what the industry is doing. It's how TripAdvisor works, right? We look at the majority of opinions, we see what everybody else thinks, and it might help us to base our own decisions around that. So you'll often see in crisis, many of us looking to see what other people are doing first before react. For those of you that have offices where there are fire drills, I think this is a brilliant example. The alarm goes off, and rather everyone automatically just gathering their things up, they start just looking around to see what everybody else is doing. Yeah, it's kind of wired into us that way. So if you are a leader and you're used to calibrating your actions in this way, you would be having an absolute hell of a time trying to work out what good looks like right now. Bringing us to leadership challenge number 2, which is, how do you know if you're on the right track if nobody else knows the right answer either? And it's worth raising your own awareness and the awareness of those around you that this is how our brain is working. And it can help to look backwards, as Deepak just described it, this kind of pendulum swing. You've got this lovely piece of evidence to show how you're going from, your people will be lurching from one set of opinions to another, because that craving for predictability and to have the right answer is built into us. and it can be very uncomfortable and inefficient where that's not possible. Now, these are really two very common leadership strategies, but they're just not going to work in this very ambiguous, uncertain world right now.
Yeah, so what impact have these challenges had on decision makers so far? Nearly all of us are going to be guilty of continuing to use familiar, tried and tested behavioural strategies that would have worked brilliantly in a pre-pandemic world. And most leaders are leaned into their experiences and their gut instincts without really understanding that the context has shifted so much. And unfortunately, going forward, that might not be the best course of action any longer. Just some of the ways that leadership strategies are showing up right now are, for instance, being risk averse, refusing to make any decisions until there's a clearer picture. Again, lots of organisations are seeking direction by waiting until someone in their industry has tried it first.
It's the certainty piece again playing there, like desperately wanting that certainty.
Yeah, another way might be making big, bold decisions on direction of travel to try and provide some kind of direction to your employees, such as deciding 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. And again, you'll see this documented really well in the press. Lots of large organisations are trying to show that they aren't standing still. They're stating we are doing something, even if they don't quite know how that something is going to work yet.
Or even if it's the right kind of something. And again, this is another strategy to try and create some certainty when there isn't any. Other places or other ways this can show up or has been showing up, particularly in our clients, excuse me, is focusing in on extreme levels of detail. So the stuff that can be controlled. So getting very specific about hours or days that people are going to be mandated to be in or out or sitting here or there, or complexities of spreadsheets, trying to regulate it and create some kind of certainty. Or it's also showing up where people are almost putting their blinkers onto just their section of the business and just doing what they're best at. So, if I'm in property, I'm just going to focus on the square meters. If I'm in HR, I'm worrying about well-being and talent, for example. Rather than seeing this wider and very connected picture that we need right now, where HR, IT, property, ops, tech, comms all need to be sitting in a room to come up with a coherent strategy that's easily articulated and understood by the organisation to take it forward.
Yeah, look, we're not saying that these decisions are necessarily wrong. However, often these decisions are not being made consciously with the awareness that in times like this, leaning only on experience is likely to steer us wrong. So because none of us have lived through a time of global disruption like the one we're going through, our experience can only really tell us so much.
So it's calling out now for a different kind of leadership, one that brings us off of autopilot. So whether you are leaders yourselves or you're supporting leaders as part of your role, our mission here is to try and raise the awareness of how our minds and brains are working and to explain why it's now time to really start looking at this differently. Because employees are looking at this differently, and we really have to listen to them to consider how we might bridge this potential gap that's showing up.
Even pre-pandemic, the world of work wasn't that great. I mean, here's some stats from various sources around, almost a quarter of people feeling exhausted, and this is prior to the pandemic, I should point out. Or over 3/4 of workers saying they didn't actually have an outstanding office experience to start with. So this idea of returning to normal actually isn't a question at all. This is a huge stat. 3/4 of workers saying they would give up salary to work from home. That's a really bold statement. It obviously shows the intent there. Other areas such as over half of kind of UK mothers feel that actually they don't get the support from the businesses when it comes to family and life balance. And again, more recently, we've found that only less than 1 in 5 employees actually wants to return to the office full time, which again, I'm sure doesn't surprise many of you. And 3/4 of employees have actually stated that when they are working from home, they are still managing to maintain a healthy work-life balance, squeezing time for exercise or a walk, and not just be stuck at a desk for 8 hours a day.
And a big one, really, finally, Nearly a third of UK employees are planning to look for a new job once this pandemic is over. I've seen several stats around this. They seem to sort of vary between 20 and 40% depending on who ran the survey. But I don't think there are many organisations out there that could afford to lose a third of their workforce without some kind of significant impact. And look, it's not going to happen instantly, but over time it will happen when the demands of employees and what they require from their workplace to meet these newly defined behavioural norms is going to happen. So bridging this gap is really going to separate out the winners from the losers in this recession. And look, let's be clear, most leaders aren't sitting there deliberately creating terrible workplaces, but more often than not, they're being led by this unconscious desire to replicate what's familiar. It becomes a self-perpetuating paradigm that's actually affecting health, and as we've seen from the stats there, mental health, well-being, and it's going to therefore also be catastrophic for the bottom line. So what we need are leaders that do have this self-awareness of their own system one triggers, and leaders that really understand that this has to be looked at as an integrated whole if they're going to move forward successfully.
Yeah, and I think what many of you on this call interested in the world of work will agree on is that the opportunity here is great. You know, it frustrates me when I read articles like 5 days in the office will return, because actually, if you look back, that return to normal wasn't the best in reality. And although it benefited a privileged few, it certainly wasn't ideal for everyone. And it's going to take bold and progressive leaders who are going to be willing to stop and relish this opportunity to create a better normal that is far more diverse, far more inclusive, and far more sustainable. So how you respond as a leader and learn from the challenging yet valuable experience this pandemic has provided us is of the utmost importance. And whether you refer to it as hybrid, agile, flexible, distributed, or activity-based working, I think what's clear is trends and labels come and go, but understanding your people, the patterns and rhythms of your business, and what constitutes your culture comes first in order to build a future work that stands the test of time. Something that's tailored to your business, your process, your people, and your workplace. You know, a future work that works for you. So you might be thinking why a design consultancy that has a long history in workplace design is suggesting you look outside the office for the answer. And the simple answer is, in today's reality, the physical office is only a single part in the greater workplace experience. And although that space could be an enabler for positive change, the spot really needs to come from great leadership. And there is a tremendous opportunity coming our way. You know, looking back through history, after L-shaped recessions such as the one we find ourselves in now, come years of innovation and growth. You know, these periods following recessions have heralded the advent of things like the TV or antibiotics or broadcast radio or vacuum cleaners. And the organisations that ready themselves now with the right cornerstones of leadership, culture, and workplace design will be the ones that lead the charge on talent, innovation, and profit, while the rest of us struggle to catch up.
So you might be thinking, how do we do this? How do we come off this autopilot? And what kinds of things should we be considering instead? So top tip number one, to start with, it's about having the awareness and not reaction. So rather than just going on autopilot, making instinctive responses, which in this climate could steer us in quite the wrong direction, we need very deliberate design. So taking the time to stop and think before you immediately react, or if you're watching very normal board behaviours or leadership behaviours in your organisation, think about how to reflect and stop and literally take a breather. Very interesting research going forward into leadership. Actually, there are a lot of organisations now that are literally putting biofeedback onto their leaders, so monitoring heart rate, blood pressure, and all of those kinds of things. And if they are not emotionally regulated, i.e. they can't access the thinking part of their brain because they're in a stress response, they're not actually allowed into the room to be able to make decisions, right? Can you imagine the impact on leadership in the world where actually all of our leaders were fully present, fully functioning on all cylinders to be able to make huge business impact decisions? So number one, awareness and not reaction. Number two, looking inwards before you're looking outwards. So stopping looking at what all your competitors are doing or your peers are doing, and kind of worrying that you're not keeping up, now is the time to do a real deep dive on your business, getting to know the people, getting to know what's really made it tick. One of our favorite questions to ask at the moment is, so what held everything together during the pandemic and why? You're going to get some incredible insights into what really is the glue that holds your organization together if you weren't able to be together during this time. Ask the different and difficult questions that are going to give you the data to make a balanced decision. So rather than gut instinct, it's 3 days in, 2 days out, it's data. And don't get fixated on just one answer or a design solution. Very rarely does one solution fit every team in an organization. And we can get quite, again, that certainty driver kicks in. We want the quick answer. So taking the time to really get to know yourself. If you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, my company hasn't changed that much in the last 6 months, then you definitely need to do this piece of work because it will have absolutely changed, as will the context that you're operating in. The third point is to focus on belonging and not buildings. Now, look, we deal with workplaces all the time. The temptation is buildings are tangible. You can measure them in square meters and air circulation, all of those things. But we need to be focusing on the wider aspect of work beyond the walls of the building. Work is a much more abstract concept than it's given credit for. There's the interconnection of the relationships, the psychological and actual exchanges of things, the values, the processes, the systems, the assets. It goes beyond the tangible stuff and the visible stuff. And so as such, you really have to pay attention to the container of all this intangible elements as well as the tangible. And look, buildings are definitely important, and you should be considering the role that your office plays in this greater spectrum of work so that you can get to know how best to leverage your physical space. But it's not just the default to how you've always used it. Because once you understand your organization better, it will impact the kind of spaces you need, how much of it you need, so that it becomes truly the beating heart of your organization and not a ghost town on a Monday and Friday and full of lost souls who are sitting there with headphones on, all talking to people on virtual calls and not connecting with each other. So deliberate design of rhythms and connection is going to be absolutely critical for this next phase. And lastly, in times of uncertainty, you need to focus on the process and not the end product. I think gone are the days where a 6 to 8 week program of strategy could kick you out an answer that said this is how it works. Change is constant, and the dynamic nature of our context is not going to settle anytime soon. So change can't be managed any longer with this sort of linear A to Z start to end mentality. There are no one point in time fix-alls anymore. There's not going to be a magic date in July or September or October where all of a sudden this becomes clear. It's going to be an iterative, accelerating and ongoing process. So what you need to do is create an approach around that to be able to keep your organization safe going through. A lovely example of this was towards the end of 2020. I think everyone was just on countdown for 2020. Like, oh, I can't wait for it to be over, as if sort of magically on the 1st of January, coronavirus was going to go away and everything would go back to normal. It's in us to want that fixed point in time, but it's unlikely to happen, and we should be planning our processes and our work around that fact.
Yeah, and look, as a purpose-led design consultancy, we don't underestimate the scale of change that's required here, and the responsibility of designers to create meaningful spaces and meaningful behaviours. What you need is everyone around the table to work this through. You need the people from the various pillars of your organisation that contribute to your workplace culture. So before you slash your square meters, sell up, roll out an off-the-shelf hybrid working mandate, or make any other high-impact decisions, we invite you to think differently and deliberately try to design your future.
And for those of you that are interested in continuating the conversation even further, or if you just want to get your hands on some of the tools to take this to the next level, we're actually hosting 3 really powerful workshops over the next 2 months that are going to give you the latest insights, shape your thinking, and strengthen your understanding around this, so that you've got some tools to build this thriving culture and business in this future world of work, whether it's hybrid or otherwise. We're just going to put the link in the chat. If you're interested, then you can just go and sign up and we'll be in contact. But thank you so much for having us. We hope that gave you enough. We were encouraged to keep it short and sweet, so we hope that we did that. Thanks, Bertie.
That was fantastic. If you could do me a favor and stop sharing, I would really appreciate that. If anyone of you got any additional questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A section, and I'll try and get to it. I have got quite a few questions already, so just bear with me. I'll try and start right from the top and work my way through. And if anyone has got any extra questions, feel free to type it in now as I'm asking the other ones through. But a really wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, first things first, I had to copy them out and get them back in. So give me 1 second. First question is from Natasha. She says, interesting to see the mind shift of organizations moving from supporting working from home to insisting for employees to work in the office. But what's the main driver behind this change, do you think? Is it reducing productivity, lack of trust, other kinds of uncertainties? What do you think is the big reason for that?
I mean, from my experience, or at least the recent conversations I've been having, it's not necessarily productivity. I think most organisations have been just as productive working from home. I think the real concern here is that lack of connection. They're worried that employees are going to lose that sense of purpose in their organisation, and I think that's the key driver behind this. It's interesting to see. Also, I think some of it is just old world thinking. I think there are just some leaders out there that are thinking, well, I want to see my people. I don't care if they're writing emails 8 hours a day. I just want to see them.
Yeah, I think some of it is sort of COVID hangover. That in this COVID hangover, we're missing people. We want to get back and see people. We want to connect again. But I think it's important not to let that, in that short term, we want to see each other again, start to colour the designing a whole future way of working, which is what we're kind of seeing happening now. And we're actually recommending, get the socialization back in again when it's safe to do so. And yeah, just don't be too swayed through that lens to, that it means you have to be in all of the time.
So that leads perfectly to the next question from, I think it's Darcel. Please forgive me if I pronounced it wrong, but basically, will post-COVID-19 kind of, the COVID-19 clearly defined a new kind of work-life balance? And if so, how?
I mean,
I hope so.
Yes.
Yeah, the opportunity, right? I mean, I think that's what we're trying to say is just stop and take the opportunity. The huge advantage here is all of those norms are broken, right? So we have a genuine pause that allows us, if we take the opportunity, to stop and really consider how to do things differently. So it will be easier in some respects to do things very differently now. I think Deepak and I are on the same page on that. We're like, yes, so much opportunity. You had this list of stuff that wasn't working before. Why would we not take the advantage and try and fix some of it?
And just to kind of add there, it's going to be incredibly difficult going forward. What we've just gone through in a way was a slightly easier way to manage a workforce because most of us were all on the same platform. What we're about to embark on now in this kind of more mixed mode, hybrid, potentially hybrid world is far more difficult to manage. So, the emphasis really does come on leadership to ensure that they are being inclusive to those that, choose, or at least it suits them better to work from home more days than be in the office, or vice versa.
I've got another question here from Duncan. Are companies beginning to take full responsibility for their employees' home office setups? I mean, that probably includes things like ergonomics. I know there's legal ramifications too, but what's your take on that? I'll be very interested to hear for that. And thank you for that question, Duncan.
We're beginning to see that more and more. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of organisations are starting to realise that for those that do require to work more from home, actually, that their work setup is just as important. Like we said, the employee experience isn't just when you're in the office; it's the entire time you're working. And if you're doing that at home, then actually some of that responsibility potentially should fall on the employer. Now, I'm not sure about what the legal ramifications of that are, but we are seeing more of a trend towards it.
Yeah, I think there's been some really interesting conversations, especially senior roles now, about packages and how exclusive the home setup can be part of. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation to watch, that one.
Fantastic. Great. I've got another one that they're coming thick and fast. Thank you very much for posting, everyone. I'll try and get to as many of them as I possibly can. Feel free to type a few more in and we'll try and run through all of them. James says, hi, James Dean here. Having good tech is going to be key to gaining equality between those in and out of the office. But is there anything in the design of the office that can support this?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look, technology, I know technology is obviously important, right? And, they're making huge steps day by day. I've been recently seeing that most of the platforms like WebEx and Zoom are starting to introduce things like noise cancellation, so that actually you could potentially sit next to a colleague and not have that distraction or that background noise. So technology is getting better day by day. However, technology alone isn't going to solve this problem. For things like hybrid meetings, it changes everything. The way the room is set up, the way you facilitate a meeting. So actually, tech alone won't solve it, but I think combination of the right type of space, the right types of behaviours, and the right types of technology hopefully gets us closer to the solution.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I got one here from Orla, and she asks Sarah, how do you see offices actively delivering a sense of belonging to staff? I agree this is a key, but belonging will mean very different things to different people. How do we get to understand this element better? It would be great to hear your thoughts a little bit more on this specific point.
Oh, really great question. And it will look different in every organization, and it will look different for individuals. And I think that's why that deep dive has to really happen, to understand, what were the things that created the psychological safety or not in the office. And definitely now, if you've not been in an office, what really worked and what didn't. It's really interesting. Some organizations have said they almost feel closer because they've had a wider access to more people in the organization than they would have done had they been there. Others are kind of going, actually, I have less access. I'm not having the water cooler moments. So it's diagnosing what those little things are, and they will be little, and they're often not tangible things, as we were saying, but the moments that did do that. And then once you understand that, it's deliberately designing them in to that future way of working. It is a very conscious choice, rather than just allowing them to, hope that everyone kind of gets there on their own.
Fantastic. I've got a question here from Rachel, who says, great presentation. Thank you, by the way. Wondering how specifically you're applying this thinking to your own ways of working at MCM.
Do you want to take that one, Deepak?
Absolutely, sure. Well, look, like with most clients of ours, we're on the journey. We are at the moment defining our own way of working. Nothing is concrete at the moment, as we've kind of stated. It's definitely a process. But what we're doing is exactly what we would do with any other client of ours. We are gathering the data, we are engaging with our employees, we are trying to understand what our work process is. One of the really important things, I think, when you're considering a new way of working is not to just try and replicate the office in a slightly different way. You've really got to go grassroots and look at your processes, your systems, your setup, because actually, maybe a lot of people have spoken to me around, well, you're a creative, surely you need to be, in front of a group of people the whole day long. Absolutely not. Most of my best ideas come when I'm alone in the shower. So actually, there are parts of my day when I'm being creative where I do need to be away and on my own so I can think. Of course, there's parts of my day where I need to be together with people. And it's just starting to understand what those rhythms are. So again, you can kind of deliberately design your office to suit those, but also me and my team can deliberately design when are we going to come together and when are we going to be apart.
Yeah, we're literally walking our talk. We're in pilot phase right now. We're running lots of survey, and we're in the next month actually getting to the sort of next phase of iterative. What does this kind of look like? What does it need? So we're learning along with everybody else. So definitely walking our talk on that one. We can keep you posted.
Fantastic. I mean, it's really nice to also hear that there is no silver bullet. There is no here's the
No,
perfect answer for everyone to go, just do this and everything will be automatically be
If
fine.
only.
If
if
only,
only, yeah.
absolutely if only. I didn't get the name on this one. It says your client representative tends not to be the ultimate leader of the organization. How do you ensure that the brief you receive is reflective of the leader or organization?
Such a good question, and I'm sure I know there's there's a lot of our colleagues on this call as well. I think it's probably everyone going, yes, exactly. We actually make it mandatory now as part of our process that we have to speak to some of those key people. One, because there's nothing more frustrating than 4 months into the project, you get to the point where you're showing them the recommendations, and then Mr. or Mrs. CEO go, oh no, I don't want it like that, and you're like, ah. So it's just mandatory now. We you cannot, especially in this environment, right? You absolutely cannot not speak to them, because their appetite for change, their system 1, system 2 is ultimately going to be a huge steer on what's possible, so as to not waste the client's own time and money as well as our own. We just absolutely make sure that it is, and we do a lot of teach. I teach system 1, system 2 thinking. I explain how it shows up and what's likely to happen, because it means we get to talk about it rather than pretend that it's not in the room.
Fantastic. Let's jump into the next one. This is, and you guys can keep them coming. There is quite a few more here to come. We're going to try and finish within the next 5 minutes, but I've got quite a few more to ask. This is from Agnes. Have you come across any hybrid working models that companies are leaning towards to use when they return to the office? Any specific models or any good company examples?
It's not one size fits all. I think that's exactly it. It's the desire to have, well, what does good look like? And there will be some industries and some client bases where being more in is important for all sorts of very valid business reasons, which is why we don't say, oh, hybrid is the way forward, because it really genuinely might not be. There are lots of organizations where that doesn't work. And there are also organizations where genuinely, like a twice a month touch point or once a quarter touch point might be enough, depending on what all of that other stuff is that's keeping the organization together. So I'm so sorry, the answer is it depends. I think most people are plumping for 2 to 3 day split because it feels kind of in the middle and they don't know what else to do. But I would say, unless you've done your data, and unless you've done your research, and unless you've really understood what's required, that's probably not going to be the right answer. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Deepak.
No, I think you made a valid point as well. Obviously, what organisations are trying to achieve here is this perfect balance of what works for the business and what works for our employees. Now, the two don't and won't immediately align potentially. So it's, again, you can only understand that by going into the data, going in, engaging with the organisation to understand what are the core business needs versus where can employees have flexibility in their job roles.
Fantastic. Next one. Could you tell us more about what it means for MCM to embark on the B Corp journey?
Oh, wow. Okay, this is a huge subject, and actually, I'm probably going to do a talk on this in a future live. But B Corp, and for those of you that know it, and I'll keep this short because I can talk about this for about another hour.
Fantastic.
You've done it now.
I know, I started. But yeah, so I mean, B Corp for us ultimately enables us to kind of balance profit, planet, and people. And it is our way of giving ourselves a framework to try to measure ourselves and constantly improve the way we do business. There's a very archaic, in my mind, view of how to do business, and that business is for profit only. For us, we are purpose driven. Our purpose is to create places that people love. And therefore, for us, fundamentally, that starts with internally looking at how we do business. What are our sustainability goals? What are our policies for our employees? What are our working methods with our clients? So, look, it's a huge subject, but let's just say it fundamentally aligns to our purpose as a business.
That's fantastic. Solid. Very, very solid answer. I got one question from Ellie. Would you say it is acceptable for low-level staff members to be asked to work from the office whilst the management team continue to work from home? Anyone?
Yeah, this is coming up a lot, right? And again, it's the nature of the business. So if you're going to make some rules up according to your hierarchy, that's going to have a pretty big cultural impact on how important people feel or not. So again, it depends, right? Obviously, if someone is required to be at a reception desk to welcome people, that you can't do that virtually. But I think and I think that you've got to understand how you're making the rules and why you're making them. And people will do it instinctively rather than necessarily going, all right, well, why are we doing it that way? And I imagine that might cause quite a lot of resentment and quite a lot of difficulty. So unless there's valid reason, right? And I think that's it. It depends. Sorry, I keep coming up with the it depends, but I think it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Very last question. Just we give everyone enough time to take a break before the next meeting starts, or finish your day, or start your day, or going for lunch. Very last question from Veronica. She asks, how important will color be to the well-being in the office? If you have any insights on that.
Potentially very important. I suppose if you look at design theory, colour plays a large part. But again, it depends. Colour alone isn't going to create a really healthy office. It's several factors. Biophilia, fresh air, views to nature. So it will play a part. Of course, it will, but it can't be the only part to play. So I think you've got to look at it in a multifaceted way.
Fantastic. On that note, I'm going to say a very excited and very, very happy. Thank you so incredibly much, both of you. It was fantastic to have you here. If you could just stay on for a little bit longer, and for those of you that have had your camera switched off, if you could do us a favor just for this second, switch your camera back on and just give our presenters a quick wave just to show our thanks if you want to do so. Just do a very quick kind of hello and hi, camera on, and just do a quick hello. It'd be much, much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Oh, wow. Lots of faces.
I love it.
Good to see lots of familiar
part.
faces as well.
Like a walkthrough.
Fantastic. Thank you all
Thanks
so
for
much.
listening, everyone.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a wonderful week.